Okay, let's begin. We are on 18b1 right at the bottom. Tanu Rabbanan. Hishmit ba sofer otiyot o pesukim. So let's say you have the sofer, and the sofer, as he's writing, right, he skipped either otiyot or pesukim. V'kar'ana koreh kimiturgaman hamtargem. So now, what happened? The guy who's reading the Megillah reads it. Kar'ana koreh, the one who's reading the Megillah, Kar'an kimiturgaman hamitargem. Miturgaman is a regular translator, but it's kimiturgaman hamitargem. So let's look at Rashi for 1 second. Rashi says over here, where is it?
Right here.
Kimiturgaman hamitargem al peh. So that's just an example. He's not translating. Normally, a translator is translating it into another language. What the Gemara is bringing over here is only just a comparison that when the translator is translating, he's translating without reading the book. You're saying, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh. And he says, and it was in the days of Achashverosh. He don't have a book. He's just translating what you said. So now let's say I'm reading, and the guy skipped words or letters. But I read the Pesukim without seeing them in the book because they're not there. So the halacha is yatsa. Okay? So he's basically filling in non-existing letters or Pesukim. Okay? Still.
In Hebrew or in a different language?
In Hebrew. So it's very misleading. Kimitargeman, like a miturgeman and mitargem, has nothing to do with translation. It's just saying, just like he does it, without reading it from inside, but listening to you and knowing what says there, so he does it without reading it. So effectively, you're doing it from memory. It's a very long-winded way of saying from memory. Okay?
So if the reader reads it correctly, notwithstanding the fact that the text is defective, everyone is still yotzeh?
That's exactly what we just said. So in other words, if it's missing, and he's filling in the blanks from memory, right? The halacha would be, if it's missing otiyot or pesukim, so either letters or verses, then it would be, it's still yatzah because he's filled in those blanks from memory. Now, the Gemara, which again, what would that tell you? If that's all you saw. Sorry?
If someone reads it by heart,
Yeah.
then you're yotzeh from listening.
But we know that that's not the case.
Right?
You can't do it.
So is that the Gemara's next question?
Imagine.
No, it's not. Says the Gemara, Mitveh, let's ask a Braita. The Braita says, Hayuba otiyot metushtashot u'mekoraot. Let's say there were letters. Metushtash usually means something which is unclear. Okay? So I don't know how exactly, I don't know if the concept of metushtash here is specifically that the letters are unclear or that they became unclear over time. The Gemara doesn't specify which it is. Okay? Either metushtash or mekoraot, or they were even ripped. Okay? Im rishum manikar kshera. If you could see the rishum, that which was written, you could see what they meant to write. Kshera. V'im lav, if it's not evident what was written there, pisula. Now the question is, if that's the case, just like you could fill in from nothing, why can't you fill in from a letter that's ripped or a letter that's smudged or a letter that's unclear? The Gemara says, Lokasha, it's not a question. Habekula. When the Braita says that you can't do it, that's when it's the whole thing is not legible. Okay? When the whole thing is metushtash or mikura, have a mixata, but when it's missing a couple words or a couple letters or a pasuk or whatever, there it was mutar. So we just reconciled the two Braitot. Okay? Are we clear so far on the difference between the two ideas?
What's the definition of unclear of the mostly part here?
So the Gemara doesn't say mitushta. The Gemara does not say what miktzata means. Miktzata means part. But what would be the difference between part and most in halakha generally? Right? How would we distinguish?
One letter is there and the rest are missing.
That's not part. That's one letter. So what's the difference between part and more than part?
Less than
Half. Exactly. So half or more makes it rov, which is considered like ruba kekula. Most is like all. Less than half, that would not be.
Is the thing about half, or it's even a shiur that's less than that? Is that the break? Is that the
make or break.
make or break?
The Gemara is reconciling two Braitot for the moment. Okay, so we have one opinion that says that if there's bits missing and you're reading it from memory, filling in those blanks from memory, it's okay. Then we had a braita that says that if it's legible, it's fine. If it's not legible, it's not fine. Gemara says, what do you mean? Why is that any worse than letters that are missing? The answer to that is, it's not worse than letters that are missing. That braita that says that if it's illegible, it's pasul, is talking about when the whole thing is written illegibly. Okay? Now, I find that very difficult to believe, if I'm honest. Can I tell you why I find, you know what that is? That's an ukimta. We've come across this already. Ukimta means when I say that this whole braita is talking about a specific case. In this case, what's our ukimta? That this braita is talking about not individual messed up letters, but rather the entirety, or most of the book. I find that like plausible when you're talking about mitushtash, because the letters are not written correctly, or maybe the ink was runny, or maybe the parchment was not accepting the ink. But you want to tell me that the majority of the letters are ripped? Do you know what it takes to rip the majority of the letters in the Megillah? Like you would need to literally like slice it with a knife across every line, right? So once we come across the idea of mitushtash, oh, I get it. But in the idea of mikura, I find that ukimta very difficult to buy.
Could it be majority of the letters of a word versus the whole majority?
So over here we're talking about the majority of the whole Megillah.
Oh.
You know, so once there's the word mikura, I find out now it could be that what you're talking about is a Megillah that got rolled out, you know, in a public place, and it was trampled. So there you could have feasibly a situation where it's literally like scratched across the whole surface of the Megillah, and then there's a plausible concept of
We're
mikura.
talking about key sections missing.
Well, even still, remember the letters are written in short, thin lines. So if you'd want the majority of, let's say there's 1,000 letters. If you want 500 of 1,000 letters to be ripped, not mitushtash, actually physically torn. You know how hard it is? If you would need to rip every one of these letters, it's very hard, right? So you'd need to like sit there, go with a razor, almost go through them. So the only way I could think about is that if the Megillah happened to be like rolled out in the street, and you have carriages rolling over it and whatever, and then it just literally got torn or worn through, that to me is more likely than just the fact that it got ripped. But either way, the ukimta is hard to reconcile with. Okay.
Unlike a Torah scroll where everything has to be perfect, a Megillah can be missing letters.
Sorry?
A Megillah can be missing letters.
Yes.
Kosher.
Yes, that's what we just learned.
Mezuzah too?
Sorry?
A scroll is a mezuzah also, would that be considered?
Oh, right now we're only talking Megillah.
And Megillah is only Megillah Esther?
And if you remember, what was strict? The strictest thing, according to what we saw, two different opinions. There's one opinion that says that it's even stricter when you're writing a Megillah than when you're writing the Torah. When do we find that idea?
The whole thing?
With the sirtut,
Oh.
with the lines. If you remember, there was basic sirtut, and then there was individual line sirtut. So a mezuzah would wind up being more strict than a Sefer Torah, except that it's a little bit of a misnomer. I don't know if any of you read, I posted that article on the chat, I think, back then. Did I send it just to you? I sent it just to Nathan then. So the lines that are required in the Megillah over and above the Sefer Torah, one would think that that's an element of strictness in mezuzah over a Sefer Torah. But it's not actually so. The reason why the Sefer Torah, according to that opinion, doesn't need the individual lines and is enough to have the outer lines is because the concept of sirtut is to take something and elevate it into like a proper document. Okay? And since a Sefer Torah is in and of itself inherently that, okay? So therefore it didn't need the sirtut to create this idea. So it's not that it's stricter, it's that inherently it is unrequired.
But it needs to be elevated. The mezuzah needs to be elevated.
What do you mean?
I thought what you were saying was because it's not a whole document like a Sefer Torah, the way to elevate this little piece of parchment is to have extra sirtut.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about the word elevate, but it's
Kedusha.
it's not in kedusha. It's in characterization.
In substance.
It's not. It's in characterization. It's that this piece of paper is not a piece of paper. This is a sefer, exactly. So when you have a Sefer Torah, it's a sefer because it's a sefer. So the fact is, therefore, it doesn't need sirtut. That doesn't mean that the mezuzah that needed sirtut is more chamur than the Sefer Torah. It just doesn't have a component that makes the sirtut required.
It elevates it from a parchment to a sefer.
Correct. Yeah. Again, I'm not sure about the word elevate. You see what I mean? Because it's
Changes the designation.
yes, it changes designation. It designates because it's not higher. It would be difficult to say that a mezuzah is holier than a Torah, which it isn't.
It's holier.
Yeah.
It's
official.
it's parchment is not as holy as the sefer until you put the sirtut and then you.
Then it's considered to be a sefer.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just being precise with the word elevate because it's not any more elevated or not. It's just a matter of creating a din sefer. Even not vis-a-vis the Sefer Torah. Even in its own characterization, it's just whether it's a sefer or not a sefer. That's the point.
You wouldn't say you've improved the designation; you will only change the designation.
Correct. That's why I'm picking on the word elevate rather than change or characterize. Okay. The Gemara continues. Now, so what have we been talking about up until now? We've been talking about reading the Megillah in out of order or in with pauses discontinuously. Now the Gemara goes to a case where the person read not discontinuously and not from memory, but rather in a situation where the person is reading it completely out of order. Tanu Rabbanan. Hishmit ba'akore pasuk echad. Lo yomar et kra et kula v'achar kach kra oto pasuk. Let's say I skipped one pasuk and you say, we'll come back to that later. Right? What would that create? That would create a scenario of non-sequenced reading of the Megillah. The person has to go back to that pasuk that he missed and read from that pasuk again and go onward. Okay? He goes into a Bet Knesset and he finds that they read already half of the Megillah. Okay? Let me read half with the Kehillah. Then I'll go downstairs to the minyan, the 8 o'clock minyan, and I'll catch the beginning. He has to read it from the beginning until the end, because that way he's reading it in order. Part of the reason why he's doing this is because the events of the Megillah show themselves to be the hand of God as you read them in their sequence. Yeah.
He goes in, he starts in the beginning, reads half, leaves. Can he continue from the halfway point till the end then? On round 2?
Yes, except that he can't have a hefsek.
Can't have a
Which we already saw earlier. How long is a hefsek from the discontinuous?
From the continuum of the line, how long?
Well, exactly. We saw those two opinions. Exactly. Okay, fine. Gemara now continues. Okay. Now, what was the chidush over here? The chidush over here was that out of sequence was not only words, but it was even whole sentences and paragraphs. That's what the Gemara added with the case of chetzia. Did you catch that? In the beginning, we talked about pasuk. He can't say, I'll read another pasuk. Now the question is, okay, but maybe standalone sections can be cut and chopped and paste. I'll give you an example for this, a good example. I have never seen any of I'm not sure if it's a Star Wars, I think Star Wars, right? Star Wars are the movies they're still making, right? There's a big machloket how you watch the Star Wars movies. Because there's prequels and sequels and what's the opposite, what's the one at the end?
Sequel's at the end. The prequel is, they do it at the end, but it's really from the beginning.
Once you have a prequel and a sequel, what's the middle? Nothing.
The main.
The main. There's no name for it. Okay, so now, once you have the main, but the main came first, and then they created sequels and prequels. So the question is, now that you have it, do you rewatch it from the beginning to the end in order? Or do you watch it like this? Or do you Machloket. Now, I haven't watched any of them. I've not seen any of the Star Wars, okay? However, why am I mentioning this? Because the idea that there could even be a machloket means that there's a intelligible way of seeing the story in segments like this and in segments like that, and actually it doesn't really matter all that much.
So if you could see the hand of Hashem, the hidden hand of Hashem, not starting at the beginning, but if you could come up with, start at chapter 4, go to the end, then do the beginning and see Hashem's hand, that might be okay?
That might have been okay. Comes the Braita and says, you saw half of it, you can't do it. You see? So, but that was really the point. The point was, obviously, if you're taking a random sentence out of context, it might mean something different, it might not tell you what it would have told you, but I would think if you chop the whole block and moved it this way or moved it that way, because there are chapters actually which it's not that bad. Like the last chapter of the Megillah could theoretically be shifted, right? But still, the halacha is, no, has to be read, even in blocks need to be read in order. Says the Gemara. By the way, I don't even know, but maybe the whole reason why the whole Star Wars franchise had to be taped and written and acted out was so that we could have a mashal for the blocks of the Megillah while we're learning today. The Gemara continues. Okay. Mitnamnem, so we already saw this before. Mitnamnem, the guy is drifting off. Yeah? And he wakes up and he keeps reading. Now, all that was for discontinuous reading, but it wasn't out of order, if you remember, okay? The Gemara says, what's the case of mitnamnem, where you're dozing is really the word for mitnamnem. Amar Rav Ashi, dikaru le va'aneh. If they call to him and he then answers back, okay, that's considered mitnamnem. V'lo yada da'adure svara. But if what's it called? If the person is, let's say you asked him something that required more than just, you ever see a guy sleeping and his wife is like, Shlomo, and he's like, what, I'm up. That don't mean you're up. If that meant you're up, a lot of people would be here for more shacharitz, okay? A lot of people, you could be half asleep and still respond to being called, okay? But what if, but you can't give a logical, so if they asked you then, what's the square root of, or divide, 132 by 6, and you can't give a reasoning, that's considered mitnamnem. But if you would remind him of that fact, then he would still remember. So all of this is to give us a characterization of what this idea is that he's dozing. If the guy's beyond that point where he's dozing, the guy's literally, okay, he's sleep reading. In which case, you can't say that he's reading the Megillah.
The guy's reading.
The guy's reading.
How do you read half asleep?
I have done it many times. I'm actually surprised to hear that question from a lawyer.
No.
You're reading.
You have to focus.
I'm saying, but if you're reading stacks of paper, you have people they're doing this. They think that they basically remember that they're doing something, but there's bits that they missed as they went in and out. Right? They didn't catch everything.
Get that on record.
But it also means
sleep while he's reading his contracts.
that's why he's yawning during Gemara. No,
You can't comprehend it if you're sleeping.
but that's the point.
I don't think you could read if you're sleeping.
So people will
You can get tired while you're reading.
People will read and carry on reading, but not quite catch what they're reading. So if they're responsible, they'll remember what they got till, and then they'll go back and do the bit that they're safek on, like in a law contract. But lots of people will remember the last word that they read.
But that's not going to be continuous. There's going to come a point in time when you stop.
That's what the Gemara is saying. One second, that's what the Gemara is saying. But here's the point. Let's say I'm scanning, and as I'm reading, okay, I know that I got to this point. But I was in and out, and there was no way for me to say that I'm at the level of the Gemara of being there, that I was Yotzeh. Okay? So then, I'm not Yotzeh even if I wake up again and continue. I have to go back, but not to the dozing part. To the part before the dozing part. Because I was not considered to be dozing. I was past that point. Now, let's just be clear. This guy is conscious. You hear that?
It's either reader or the listener.
What do you mean?
Are we defining the difference between a listener hearing the Megillah? I come to hear the Megillah in shul. I'm listening to the Megillah. I'm not reading it.
Right now we're talking about reader.
Only reader.
Yeah. We're talking about reader. Now, again, remember, this guy, at this point, we've given 3 different characterizations, right? One is, you call him and he answers. The second thing is, he's actually beyond the point where he's able to give a logical response. But if you remind him, he'll actually remember. So it's like this quasi mode where the guy is in that space, and still the halacha is mitnamnem yatsa. Okay. Hayakotva dosha Megillah. So we already learned that you have to be reading the Megillah from within the Megillah. Now let's say a guy is writing the Megillah, or dosha, he's learning the Megillah, he's quoting Pesukim from the Megillah, or Megillah, or he's correcting the Megillah. Any one of those, of those examples, right? So the guy's reading the Megillah out loud. Is he Yotzeh or not? The Gemara gives a clause. Im kiven libo, if he has in mind to fulfill his reading the Megillah obligation, then the halacha is Yotzeh. If not, not. So the Gemara says, okay, what's the case? Hey chidami. Idika misader psuka psuka. If the case is that as he's doing it, misader means he's aligning, he's arranging each one of these sentences in his mind. Vikatavla. So first he arranges it in his mind, and he's reciting it from his memory, and then vikatavla, and then he writes it down. Ki kiven libo ma'have alpehu. Who cares that the guy did it from memory and then wrote it? When he read it out loud, it was pre-writing, which means that there was nothing written, which means that he didn't read it from a written scroll. So then, of course, that's not the case, because that would not be yotzeh.
Rabbi, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah?
You said he got disconnected.
What should I do? Leave and then come back in?
So memory, no good. That's what we said. That's why that doesn't work.
Right. So if he's reading it out loud, by the way, a lot of Sofrim do this. They write Shema, Yisrael. That means that every word he's uttering is not written.
When you write,
Yeah.
don't you naturally read what you wrote?
What? Right? Shema?
No,
you don't have to say it out loud.
Like Shema, as you're writing.
You write it.
So the Gemara is going through what is the case. The first case we nixed is when the person first starts with saying it out loud so that he's writing the right word, okay? Obviously that is not going to work. Kikiven libo, so the Gemara asks, who cares if you had in mind to read the Megillah? You didn't read. Literally, you did not read a Megillah. Alpehu. The Gemara says, look, that's not the case. The katab psuka psuka, he wrote a pasuk and then a pasuk and then karile, he read it. What's the chidush of the Gemara then? Think about it.
Memory is no good.
Think about it. No, more than that. No, the Gemara now suggests the other way. So as Morris said, he writes a pasuk and then he reads the pasuk that he just wrote. So if the Gemara would then be saying, Ki kiven labo, if he had in mind, then he's yatzah. Problem is, the guy did not read from a Megillah. That means when he wrote Vayihi b'me'ach HaShosh, he read from a sentence. So it doesn't make sense. Now maybe the last sentence that he read from the Megillah. Okay? So the Gemara is going to say, Mi yatzah, could that be? You want to tell me that if you write every verse and then you read it, Yotzeh, Mi yatzah v'amar Rabbi Chama bar Guria amar Rav, halacha k'divrei Omer kula. The halacha says that a person has to read. The halacha is according to the shita that says kula, that you have to read the entire Megillah. V'afilu leman da'amar mi ish Yehudi. And even according to the person that says that you have to read just from mi ish Yehudi till the end, okay? You still would need that you're reading from a Megillah that's completely written. In this case, right? It's not written. Just by the way, we just heard a huge chidush that there's an opinion that says that you could read the Megillah from Ish Yehudi and that's enough. Right? Huge chidush. Unfortunately, we don't hold like that. No. Okay. The Gemara continues. Okay. So what would be the case that he's reading? Now, again, you realize what the Gemara just did. We boxed ourselves into a halachic corner. Because now, what's the only way that he would be able to read the Megillah is when the Megillah is written in its entirety. In which case, who cares that he's a scribe? He just read a Megillah that was completely written. So now we're stuck. What is the case of a person who's reading while he's writing the Megillah? The Gemara says, Ela de mancha Megillah kameh. The situation is that he has a Megillah in front of him. Vikari le mina psuka psuka. And he's reading each pasuk from the kosher Megillah as he's writing the other Megillah, the katavla. He's copying. And now the Gemara says, so now hold on one second. Why in the world would you think that he's not Yotzeh?
F6.
No, but you're allowed to read it discontinuously.
No, just have said that maybe that he's taking more time to write.
So even then, remember when we talked about discontinuous, the amount of time that you would need is to read the rest of the Megillah. Machloket, if it means from the beginning till the end or from there till the end, but not for one sentence. So that would be good. So what's the chidush? The answer is that the chidush is because he's not reading it to read Megillah. He's reading it because he wants to write a Megillah. So the kavanah is not there. So that's the chidush of the Mishnah is. The chidush of the Mishnah is if you're writing a Megillah and reading from a kosher Megillah, but you're not reading from a kosher Megillah to read from a kosher Megillah. You're reading from a kosher Megillah because you're leading yourself in your writing. So what would be the halakha? The Gemara's answer is ki kiven yatsa. If you had kavana, you're yatsa. But if you did not have kavana, you're not yotze. The Gemara continues. Okay. Lema. Sorry.
It's also taking him a month to do it.
It's going to take him a while. Yeah, it's going to take him a while to finish Megillah. I wonder, by the way, if the guy starts at night and finishes in the morning, does he fulfill the obligation for the night and the morning? Okay, fine, let's go. Lema Misayele, the Gemara says, let us bring a proof. Le Rabba Bar Bar Chana. Let's bring a proof to Rabba Bar Bar Chana. Dama Rabba Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. The Rabba Bar Bar Chana. Let's bring a proof from our Mishnah to Rabba Bar Chana and Rabbi Yochanan. Dama Rabba Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. Asur lichtov ot achat shelo min haktav. You're not allowed to write even one letter in any of the Chaf Dalid books of the 24 books of Nevi'im Ketuvim, unless you have a full book in front of you. Why? We were worried. Think about this. Imagine I write a scroll and I write it from memory. Obviously, there's a potential of something getting messed up. What's the problem? Now Harry comes. He wants to write a Sefer Torah. He takes out my Sefer from the thing. How does he copy it? My mistake. Someone copies from Harry's Sefer. That Sefer, that mistake in that Sefer could infect perpetually, right, all Sefarim.
You said this at the we went to Sotheby's. You said how amazing it is that this is the
That is the
exact one that we have till today.
Till today.
Right?
Yes. So what's crazy is that, so Rabba Bar Chana says you can't write anything unless you have an open book in front of you. Now the Gemara says, let's prove that that's the case from here. Why? Because the only case of Kotva in the Mishnah is a case where the guy is reading the Megillah from a kosher Megillah as he's writing a Megillah. So let's prove that you have to write always from a kosher text in front of you. The Gemara says there's no proof. Dilma ditramile itramuye. No, the Gemara says yes, that's the only case where the case of the Mishnah applies, where a sofer is writing from a kosher Megillah. But maybe a sofer does not have to write from a kosher Megillah. All that would mean is that he has to read Megillah again. So you can't prove from the, you understand? The Gemara said, you just told me that the case of the Mishnah, when is it relevant? When the sofer is writing a Megillah, he's looking in a kosher Megillah and he's writing the Megillah. So that's why, if he's reading from there, even if so kikivenya libo, if he has in mind to read, then he's yotzeh. The Gemara says, sidebar, I just found a proof for Rabba Bar Bar Chana, who says that when you write any holy book, it has to be from a book. Because the only case of this Mishnah is when a guy is reading from another book. The Gemara says, yes, that's the only case in the Mishnah where we're wondering whether he's Yotzeh or not. That doesn't mean, it doesn't prove that you have to do that in order to fulfill it. So the scenario, if you don't hold like Rabba Bar Bar Chana, the guy can write it from memory, and if he got it right, it is kosher. It just means that he would need to read Megillah, because he never read the Megillah. Okay? Gemara continues. Yes.
Right, our rabbis wrote the Mishnah and the Gemara from memory, right?
They wrote what Mishnah and Gemara?
They wrote
the Mishnayot.
Torah,
Yes.
right? From memory.
Yes.
They passed it down.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it come a point in time where you have to respect a writing and copy from the writing and not from your memory?
I'm not sure what you mean. Explain what you mean. Because let's divide Torah Sheba'al Peh from Torah Shebechtav.
Torah Sheba'al Peh.
The 24 books are Torah Shebechtav.
Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Torah Sheba'al Peh is Gemara and Mishnayot.
Right.
So we're not talking yet about Torah Sheba'al Peh at all.
We're talking about Megillah.
Only Megillah is Torah Shebechtav.
Oh.
It's one of the 24 books.
Okay.
Okay? Now, what you're asking is a good question. I thought you were going to ask, so why are we assuming that the Mishnah is correct?
Yeah.
If writing something in Ketav is so important to write from another Ketav, at least according to Rabba Bar Bar Chana, we might not have a proof from the Mishnah that he's correct. But Rabba Bar Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, you have to do so, okay? And the point of that is for the authenticity of the manuscript to stay intact, okay? So then when it comes to Mishnah and Gemara, they wrote it down and it wasn't from another book because there wasn't another book. So how do we know that it's intact?
Right, and there came a point in time where they when they wrote it down, did they then transcribe what they wrote down for generations to come?
Yes, they did. But
first
I want to
version.
point out the chidush. You know what the chidush is? There's never a Gemara that says this pasuk is wrong, or let's establish that this pasuk is in this scenario. We're doing that for the Mishnah and the Gemara. Why? For this reason. That is entirely the point. There is a danger when it comes to, I think it's Zoom is on now. I'm not sure why. Right? Are you and you're on the Wi-Fi?
Recording in progress.
I'm not sure why.
Just call, right?
Maybe just call him if it's just. There was two people on it. There was two people on it. Him and Maurice. Yeah. So that is exactly what the process of Gemara is doing. We have a Mishnah, we have another Mishnah, the Mishnah will contradict each other. What are we going to do? Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe it needs to be fixed. The answer is no. We found another Braita that says an opinion of Rabbi Meir. Okay, so then if that's an opinion, an established opinion, so then that would mean that this Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Meir. Now we can't find a single opinion. So, right, now we have to ask ourselves, maybe this Mishnah is incorrect, or maybe we have to, maneuver the Mishnah to be talking about a specific case, in which case. Now, that was also gathered from people's like private manuscripts and whatever, and notes. But there was nothing written for the public. There was nothing written because it was not allowed to be. In fact, it was an isur from the Torah to write down any of Torah Sheba'al Peh. I always go back and think, if you go back in time, far enough, you know what a Jewish library looked like?
That's it.
No,
Nothing.
the Aron,
That's it.
Torah, with the 24, and eventually, then they got to the 24 books, they started adding books into the Aron, like Yoshua, Shoftim, right? Now they're adding, and then there's another one, and there's another one, and there's another one. But then it was done. At 24 books, it was done. The whole of Judaism. By the way, you ever meet these guys, Christian guys, every pasuk in Torah, you're like, wow, I can't believe it. Yeah, because there's only 24 books. Nothing else. Nothing else that you need to say. The Testament, Old Testament, and then whatever New Testaments they added.
Still pretty impressive.
It's impressive. It's impressive. But you know what? Imagine there was no Gemara. Imagine there was no Mishnah. Imagine there was no Midrash. Imagine all the halachot. There's 0 halachot. No Mishnah Berura, no Shulchan Aruch, none of that. No Musar. It's just the memorization of the verses, and that's it. It's a static. It's a lot of verses, but it's static. It doesn't move. It doesn't change. So initially, the Jewish Bible, the Jewish library was 24 books, and that was it. It's easier to buy someone a bar mitzvah gift then. Okay, so the Gemara says, sorry, raise Hazi. Okay, let's finish. Ray is learning discontinuously. Okay, so the Gemara says, let's go back now on this halakha itself. Gufa. Amar, every time it says gufa, guf means the body, like a goof, like a body. So let's go back to the body of this statement. Gufa, Amar Rabba Bar Yochanan Bar Yochanan. You're not allowed to write one letter, shalom menaktav, not from the text. Now I want you to understand what that means. You know what that means? That if the guy is writing Shema and he knows Shema by heart,
He still has to copy.
Yeah, he's got a copy.
Is this? No.
Oh, no, right.
you just logged into this.
Okay, sorry. I got to shut it out.
He would still, even if he knows Shema by heart, he still has to copy from it.
Yeah. Not only that, if he writes Shema and then he starts writing the Yud, he can't write the Yud. Not one letter. So everything needs to be from the Ketav according to Rav Bar Bachana. The Gemara says, Metve, we ask a question from a Braita. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Mase b'Rabbi Meisha alach le'ever shana ba'asya. There was a story one time, Rabbi Meir went to go do the Ibur Shana ba'asya. What does that mean, Ibur Shana? At the time, there was a process they had to go through in order to be Me'aber the Chodesh. So the rabbis needed to gather together, and they had to, decide if they were going to do it, if they were going to add, depending on a lot of different calculations in the moon, etc., etc. So they would gather together and they would do the Ibur Chodesh. So Rabbi Meir went to Asya to be able to add an extra month of the year. V'lo haya sham Megillah. There was no Megillah in that place. Hazit, they didn't have one. He wrote it by heart, the Megillah, and then they read the Megillah that he read.
How is that allowed?
That is exactly the point. Rabbi Bar Chana said you can't do that. Now the Gemara asks a question from a Braita of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir precedes, as a Tana, precedes Rabbi Bar Chana and Rabbi Yochanan, who are both Amoraim, although Rabbi Yochanan was kind of at the crossover. The Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Abau, Shani Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is different. The Mekayim be, because we say about Rabbi Meir, Ve'afapecha yashru negdecha. We have that word, Ve'afapai, utnuma, we say every morning. Take the sleep away, me'afapai, from my eyes. Ve'afapai yashru negdecha. The eyes, his eyes, looked straight in front of him. Now, what does that mean? Amalei Rami Bar Chama Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti. Mai ve'afapecha yashru negdecha. What does that mean? That your eyes look straight in front of you? Amalo elu divrei Torah. Those are the words of Torah. Dechtiv bahu, like it says by the words of Torah. Hataif einecha bo ve'enena. If you close your eyes from the words of Torah, you open up your eyes again, they disappeared. It's gone. So even though it says "Ve'afapecha yashru negdecha," his eyes looked straight at the Torah. Even though the words of Torah, they're so easy to forget that you just close your eyes and they disappear. You forget them already. Still, whenever Rabbi Meir opened his eyes, the Torah was directly in front of him. So what we're referring to over here is again, you might look at this and think that we're describing the memory of Rabbi Meir. But I would argue that that's not the case. Because this idea of hataif enecha, close your eyes and they disappear, bo ve'enenu, that doesn't make sense. We're not referring to something which is so easily forgettable. We're referring to something on a much deeper level than just the ability to memorize something. It's not that Rabbi Meir had a great memory, although he may have also had a great memory. It's also the fact that what we've discussed so many times is that Torah, as a spiritual acquisition, is something that when a person puts effort into it, when they work, when they sweat, when they toil to understand it, then it gets given to them, so to speak, as a gift. They acquire that Torah or that spiritual understanding. Rabbi Meir, not only did he have this incredible memory, he was also someone that was constantly engaged in Torah. So even if he closed his eyes, or even if he moved his mind away from the Torah, there was always a focus on the Torah for Rabbi Meir. And therefore, since he was constantly and consistently engaged with the Torah, therefore for him to write the Megillah was okay, and Rabbi Meir is the exception, not the rule. Yeah, he knows the Torah by heart. He's able to recall every word from the Torah because of this, his intense connection with it. Still, the Gemara says, Rav Chizda ashkechel Rav Chananel. Rav Chizda found that Rav Chananel was writing books from the 24 books, Shalom min haktav. Amalei, he said, Ruya kol haTorah kula likatev al picha. The whole of the Torah, all of it, you could write it all out and it would be done correctly. But still the Chachamim said, Asur lichtov ot achat shalom min haktav. In other words, the Gemara says, this doesn't make sense, because it's not a function of memory. There was a scenario where Rav Chizda said to Rav Chananel, who was writing the Torah, he said, you could write it all. You wouldn't make a single mistake. But it's not a function of making a mistake. It's a halacha that the Chachamim instituted that you're not allowed to write even one letter without be writing it from a book. So therefore, how could it be that Rabbi Meir wrote a Megillah from memory? The Gemara says, from the fact that you could say that all the Torah is worthy of being written from his memory, and its law. You see, obviously, Rav Chananel also had a grip of the entirety of the Torah, and therefore, still it was asur. If that's the case, v'harav Meir katav. How did Rav Meir write the book from memory? Gemara answers, no, he wasn't allowed to write the book from memory. But Shatadchak Shani, he was in a scenario where he had no other Megillah. Now, I always wondered about this. Okay? Shatadchak Shani. What does that mean? Shatadchak Shani. Normally, what that means is in a scenario where it's B'di'evid, the law is different. So, I have two ways of understanding Shatadchak Shani. Can anyone want to give a crack at it? Two different approaches. What do you guys think?
If you have Rabbi Meir was obviously of a certain level.
Yeah.
And in the case where it was a dire circumstance, then maybe that gives him the ability to do so. But I could think of plenty of reasons why that would not hold just as easily. So,
No, what I'm asking is, what is the Gemara's answer? Shat hadchak shani. What is the Gemara answering?
Saying that there was no Megillah there, so he had
it was
to
a
do
tough
It's
sha'at.
not okay, but in this situation, because there was no other
it. It's an
option.
It's the
exception.
best you can have.
So guys, I want to illustrate, because I think fundamentally your minds have to start splitting this hair. Let me explain. There's a halacha that says you have to write a thing from what's it called? From the text. Okay? Does that mean that I'm obligated to write it from the text, or does it mean that the text is obligated to be written by the text? Now let me explain the fundamental difference. No. Is it a law in me, or is it a law in the writing? So in other words, now I wrote it not from a text.
Say it again?
Now I wrote it not from a text. Is this kosher?
No.
Did we say that if you write it not from a text, this is not kosher? Or did we say you are forbidden from writing it not in the text? Now, what if I'm willing to take that isur on, slap me on the wrist, I did it isur. Okay, Hashem's gonna get me back. But this is kosher.
But it could or could not be.
So when you see Shat Adchak Shani, you have to figure out, what is the Gemara actually answering? What does it mean that Rabbi Meir was in a place with no Megillah, he had no option, so what was he supposed to do?
He took it upon himself to do
Huh?
that. He took it upon himself to do the Isur, but what he wrote down was kosher.
I have a funny answer to this. Yes.
What if he wrote it twice? Once from memory, and then copied it from kosher Megillah, and the second one was kosher.
But the writing of the
Would
Megillah,
be permissible.
the writing of the first Megillah is Asur.
That's what.
No problem, but he only read from the second one.
But if the writing is Asur,
The Isur is
the
not.
Isur is in the writing. See, that's what we have to come to grips with here.
Once
Let's look
I like
again.
what Nathan said. He wrote it.
Yeah.
What he did was Isur, but he said the writing is kosher.
So again,
And then
yeah.
he wrote it again from the one that's kosher.
So again,
Is it kosher?
no, you guys are missing the point. You guys are missing the point. I want to show you. It's clever, but it's foolishly clever. Let me explain. If the Isur is in me, then I don't need to write it twice.
That's your mistake, not the book.
Wait. This needs to land. If the Isur is in me, I don't need to write it twice. I wrote it once. I got the Isur. The Megillah is kosher first time. I don't gain anything by writing it again. I just now wrote a second Megillah, but I already did the Isur.
Kosher yourself. Got it.
And
Hold on. You drove right up to the reservation.
first time, it's not kosher the second time.
Correct? So you drove right up to the reservation, and then you parked the car outside. I'd like to suggest a simple answer. What if I wrote a Megillah that was pasul? And then I wrote a Megillah from a Megillah that was pasul but had all the words.
Pasul.
No. Who said? Does it say that it has to be kosher?
Wait, if you wrote a Megillah, why was it pasul?
Let's say it wasn't written on the parchment. It was written on paper. It was written with yellow ink.
So then, if he reads it,
Okay.
even if it's.
So one more time. Let's look again. Hold on. Let's look again. Asur lichtov ot achat shelo min haktav. It doesn't say shelo min ha-Megillah. What's the isur to write a Megillah? So I didn't write a Megillah. I wrote a Megillah that was pasul. But the second time I write the Megillah, from a pasul Megillah, it's still ktav. So I fulfilled no isur, and I fulfilled no non-kosher Megillah.
He did write it twice, but it was
You wrote it twice, but I wrote the first time not as a Megillah.
sick. But what I have is still a question. What
He
do
never
you
used the
judge.
first one.
Now,
Never used it.
if that's the case, it can't be that Shlomo Fachi is smarter than Rabbi Meir.
I don't know that one.
Why don't you love it?
I think I don't love it.
Why?
It just doesn't work for me.
Why doesn't it work?
It just doesn't work.
Tell me why. Give me the svara.
It defeats the whole purpose. He could just read it by heart. We said it before. He could say it by heart.
No, I can't. You can't say it by heart. You can't say it by
He
heart.
could read it off of the pasul thing by heart. It's the same thing.
No, you can't,
Why not?
because it's pasul Megillah.
But it's
Now
not,
it's
it's
it.
not a Megillah. It's just a katav.
So he can't read from that.
But if,
You don't fulfill your
what
obligation.
if he knows it by heart? If you say you're missing words and stuff.
But not the whole thing. Only if it's missing some words.
This whole thing is no good.
You got it?
Yeah, I still don't like it.
How could you not like it?
I don't know. I just
It's
don't.
It's perfect. One more time. what is the Isur? The Isur is to write a Megillah.
I got it.
If I write something that's
He didn't
not a
write He
Megillah,
didn't write a Megillah. He wrote
okay,
a book.
is that Asur? It's not
Write it
Asur.
on a yellow pad,
Yeah,
and then you write it on parchment from the yellow pad.
perfect. Why? Because I wrote it from Kitav.
But who's
Why
saying
can't
the
you take the
Kitav
simple
is
answer?
from the...
Sorry?
Why can't you accept the simple answer?
Which simple answer?
That Rabbi Meir, while not really being permitted to write it from memory,
It's stolen.
he wrote it from memory because there was a need. There was no other. There was no other book there.
I have no problem with that. I'm trying to ask, what is the Gemara actually saying when it doesn't tell us the end of the story. It just says it was a difficult time. Right? So therefore it's different. What do you mean it's different? Do you mean it's different? And therefore he said, I'll take the Isur, I'll take the hit if we could all read Megillah. Is that what he's saying?
No.
Is he saying, maybe he's saying something else. Maybe he's saying, and this is the second way of understanding, when the Chachamim said Asur, it was when you had another option. When there's no other option, they never made the Isur. See?
I like that.
That's way two.
Harry,
And
I
there's,
started
are
with
you
it.
okay with that?
We
started with
there,
that.
Rabbi.
He feels
We
better.
and then there's way three, that that it's not just Asur, it's that the Megillah is not kosher if you didn't write it from a Ketav. And that's when we start with these questions of writing it once, writing it again, okay? So it really depends on how you understand Shat Adchak Shani.
You're choosing option 2.
Why am I choosing which option? I don't like any of this. You can't have an opinion that you can't back up.
I like the first one.
Hold on.
You know what the first one is?
Go ahead. What's the
There's
first
no
one?
other option.
Rabbi Meir was very Kabbalistic.
Okay.
And so when he opened his eyes, the Torah was actually in front of him.
Beautiful. It's not written.
And he just wrote it down.
Beautiful, but it's not written.
But he was very special.
He was special. He was
It was
special.
impressing me.
He saw it. He saw it.
Now, 1 second. I just want to point out. Let's go back now and read Rabba Bar Bar Chana again. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Asur lichtov ot achat shelo min haktav. You're not allowed to write one letter not from the ktav. What does that sound like? Does that sound like the book is not kosher? Or does that sound like we made an isur
Right.
on you to write it?
Can't write.
Then it's very clear which way of the three ways you're going to see the Gemara. My point I'm trying to drive home is that it's not willy-nilly how we see the Gemara. You can't just choose to have multiple.
read the word.
You got to read the word. You got to see. So that's where Rabbi Bar Chana meant. So therefore, when it says Shani, what does it mean? It means either of two things, because there's still two possibilities. One is, Rabbi Meir said, even though it's Asur, still going to do it. The other way is, the Chachamim never made it Asur in the Shat Adchak. Rav Chananel was being chastised by Rav Chizda because he had another option. Rabbi Meir was in the city of Asya. They didn't have a Megillah. Everyone's going to miss the Megillah. What does he do? He writes it from memory. Either it means that he was willing to take the Yisur, and you can't prove from there, or it means that the Chachamim never made the Gezerah.
The second is the easiest.
I would suggest that it's a second. I'll tell you why. Because we have a general rule, and this is fascinating to know in Halakha. There are many cases in Halakha where, strictly according to the letter of the law, we would say that the Halakha applies in this case. Halakha applies in this case. But there's a mechanism in Halakha called Mikre Nadir. You know what that means? It means it's an outlier case. The Chachamim did not make Gezerot to include random wacko cases. Their Gezerah was for a normal scenario. You have this insane, weird case that never came up before. It's called the Mikre Nadir. And in that case, Mikre Nadir lo gazru be Rabbanan. The Chachamim did not make the Gezerah in that extreme case.
But this is not a crazy case.
It's a crazy case because
Asya was a very famous place.
I'm not saying
Did it change a month?
I'm not saying that Asya is not a famous place. I'm saying that there should not be a Megillah to be able to copy it from, and you should have someone who it's not a problem to copy without, because he knows it all by heart. So you have to have those two stars need to align. Okay? Now, last but not least, what if you're in a Shat Adchak, you're in Asya, and you're not Rabbi Meir?
Google.
Asur.
Google.
So it's really
I would say Asur. Why? Because this is exactly why they made the Isur. What Rav Chizda told Rav Hananel is, he said, you're not going to make a mistake. But the Chachamim still made a gezerah. I have to hold by it. When you are going to make a mistake, you can't say the Chachamim didn't expect it to be. In this case, this is exactly the reason. You, with your non-eidetic memory, right, is exactly the reason why we made the gezerah. So you can't rely and say Shatat Chak if you don't have the Rav Chizda, the Rav Hananel, Rabbi Meir gift of being able to be so present with the Torah that it's directly in front of you. Why did I get to this case of Nathan in the first place? There was it was a fascinating case where this guy accepted on himself to always do Birkat HaMazon from a Birkon. Anyway, he accepted on it from Rav Shach. And he went back to Rav Shach and he said, when the rabbi told us to do this, I accepted on myself. And the last 6 months, I only missed Birkat HaMazon one time. He said, why'd you miss the one time? Like we all got for our report card. Why'd you get the 1B? Right? What did he say? He said, I was on a plane. I was on the plane, and there was no Birkat. I asked everyone, and there was nothing to do. What can I do? Rav Shach said, why didn't you write down Birkat HaMazon and then read it from your own writing? And that's why I was going to this with idea with Nathan. Okay. We're done. We're done, right? Okay.